Okay, so here we are. What we want to do now is we want to sketch a graph of the following. So on Friday, we talked about two pieces. We talked about amplitude and we talked about period. Now, please look at the sheet that I just gave to you that looks like this. Now, Nadia, did I give you one like this? Okay, I'm going to give you that right now. I want you to look at that sheet. I'm going to pull it up here because that's the sheet that you get to use on the test. And I think that, and by the way, I want you to know, not because I want you to pat me on the back, I just want you to understand that I do value your learning and I want you to succeed. I don't it's not like when we get a curriculum, I like get all this stuff. It's not like they're like, oh, here's your worksheets, here's your study guides, here's your notes. None of that comes with it. There's basically an answer key, and that's all you get with the curriculum. So what I did is I said, well, how can we help students understand this stuff better? I thought if they can start to see what these look like and they have some notes to follow along with, that will help them duplicate what the graph looks like. Now, you see that the X and Y axis maybe aren't written in here very well. So I'm going to write them like that, but you're going to get this sheet. Today we are graphing sine and cosine, and we will continue to graph it tomorrow. However, we'll get to much more difficult graphs like secant and cosecant in the future. If we can't graph sine and cosine, it's going to be very difficult to graph anything else. All the other graphs are based around sine and cosine. And part of what I share with you is this. For sine and cosine, if you're wondering how to find the amplitude, it's right here, the absolute value of A. If you're wondering how to find the period is 2 pi divided by B. So this is kind of your lifeline sheet that you'll keep with you and you will use as you get ready for the test and on the test for that matter. I don't know yet. Depends on how well we do with the material. Sketch a graph of the following. So we're actually going to start with the second one. We're going to start right here. And for y equals a times the cosine of bx, we know that the amplitude, as we said, is the absolute value of a, and that the period is equal to 2 pi divided by b. So let's figure out what the amplitude and the period are. What is the a value for this graph? What's the number in front of cosine? 3. So the amplitude is equal to 3. What do you think the period is? How do I do the period? 2 pi divided by, what's the number in front of the x? There's a 1 in front of the x. So that's all I do. 2 pi divided by 1 is 2 pi. So what I do is this step. I take my period and I mark it out. 2 pi. Then I divide it into 4 pieces. What's half of 2 pi? Pi. And what's half of 1 pi? Pi over 2. So let's figure out what goes in between there, because these are things you have to mark on your test. This is 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. So that's going to tell me where I can put the period, okay? Now, after that, I need the amplitude. What's the highest that this graph goes? It goes all the way up to 3. What's the lowest this graph goes? -3. Now, there's a difference between sine and cosine. I'm going to have you look at your sheet of notes and tell me what is the difference between sine and cosine. They're very similar, but what's a distinct difference? Yeah, sine starts at 0. Cosine starts at, here's another way to think of it. Cosine won't necessarily start at 1. It will start at the maximum value. So since it's 3 times cosine, or 3 times 1, it will start all the way up at a value of 3. So cosine starts all the way up here, up at 3. Now, if it starts up there, where's it going to go? Is it going to start going down, or is it going to start going up? It's going to start going down. And its first thing it will do is it will cross over the x-axis at this mark. Because the cosine of pi over 2 is 0. And so it has a height of 0 right here. And so if you plug in pi over 2 on your calculator to cosine, you will get 0. Where do you think it goes after that? Look at the graph. It continues to go all the way down to its minimum spot. So these are the graphs that we generated on Friday, and it gets to its minimum. Where do you think it will go after that? Back up. So it will cross over the x-axis next. And where will it go after that? All the way up to the top. So if you simply just kind of mark these points, you'll get a very good feeling as to the shape of the graph. Now, if that seems a little bit different, it should. You haven't done it before. But once we do 4 examples, I think it'll kind of sink in a little bit better. But that's the graph of y equals 3 times the cosine of x. I want to be clear. What I would like you to do on your assignment is I would like you to sketch a period on the right side, but also one on the left side. I didn't set your graphs up very well to do that, and I apologize, but I'm going to try to fit in some extra space here to do that, okay? So let's do the next one. Whoop. Okay, I'm going to just move that over a little bit, and we'll do the next one. Who can tell me what is going to be the amplitude for this one? The amplitude is the absolute value of the number in front of the function. The absolute value of -1 is 1. The amplitude has to be positive. It is positive. And the period is equal to 2 pi divided by the number in front of x. What's the number in front of x? 1. 2 pi over 1 is 2 pi. So at this point, I mark off my period. 2 pi. How many spaces am I going to divide it into? 4. Half of 2 pi is pi. Half of pi is pi over 2. I will count. 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. It won't always be 3 pi over 2. Your next one will do differently, but you can always count like that. Okay, I told you I'm going to have you do 2 periods, one on the right side and one on the left side. So I'm going to put the other one over here. This one, I just go to -2 pi. And then I go -pi, -pi over 2, and -3 pi over 2. So it's the same thing on the other side, just negative. The amplitude is 1. So what's the highest that this graph goes? 1. What's the lowest that this graph goes? -1. Good. Now, is this a graph of sine or a graph of cosine? So is it going to start at the maximum minimum, or is it going to start at the middle? The middle. Look at your sine graph. This is super important that you make this connection right now because this is a new learning for you. The sine graph starts at the middle. Cosine starts at the maximum or the minimum. But what's different about this sine graph? What's the one thing that's different? It has a what in front of it? It has a negative. So instead of it's going to be actually reflected over the x-axis. So instead of starting here and going up, it's going to start here and go down. So we will follow that pattern. So we start in the middle, but instead of going up, we go down because of the negative in front. So it's going to reflect everything over. So I'm going to start going down. So I bottom out at -1. And then where do I go from there? I go back to the middle. Exactly. I come back up, cross over the middle. After that, I go back up. And then to the middle again. Now, we went to the right that time. Let's also go to the left. I'm going to draw my shape and then see if we can predict what we do to the other side. Okay, if I go back here, will I be going up or down? Up, because that's just the direction that the graph is going, isn't it? And then after that, I'll go down, down, then back to the middle. And so you can see that this is a graph of sine of x, negative sine of x, and it shows 2 full periods. Better than the first example? This next one will be even better. Whoops, sorry. 2 more examples. What is the amplitude for the third graph? It is 4. In order to identify the period, I need to know the number in front of x. What's the number in front of x? Pi. So I take 2 pi and divide it by that number. What is 2 pi divided by pi? Just 2. So what's different about this period is it doesn't have a pi in it. And that's okay. We can do that. So I'm going to mark it off. Divide 2 in half and I get 1. Divide 1 in half and I get 1/2. Now let's count. 1/2, 2 halves, 3 halves, 4 halves. I go the same thing in the opposite direction. -1/2, -1, -3 halves, -2. My amplitude is 4. So what's the highest spot I go to? What's the lowest spot I go to? Sine. Will it start in the middle or will it start at the min or max? It's going to start in the middle. Is it going to start by going up or by going down? Up. Why is it going to start by going up? Because it's positive. So I start there and I go up. Let's go reverse. If I go back to the left, will I be going down or will I be going up? Down. We follow that same pattern. It just follows that pattern over and over again. It's a wave. Is it getting better? Okay, last example. Notice we have a few things going on here. Number one, we've got a negative. Second of all, we've got cosine. And third of all, we've got a fraction. So a lot to learn from here, but this is a very legitimate test question, okay? And we're going to build off this to even try other problems. So y equals -2 cosine of x over 3. What is the amplitude? Very good. It is +2. In order to find the period, I have to take 2 pi over 1. I won't write it like that. I'll confuse you. Okay. 2 pi, and I divide it by, kind of a trick, what's the number in front of x? Isn't x over 3 the same as 1/3 x? The number in front of x is 1/3. See that? So it's 2 pi divided by 1/3. If you want to divide that, you have to divide fractions. How do you divide fractions? So it's 2 pi over 1. Instead of divided by 1/3, it's times 3 over 1. What's 2 pi times 3? 6 pi. So I mark out 6 pi. What's half of 6 pi? 3 pi. What's half of 3 pi? 3 pi over 2. Watch me count. 3 pi over 2, 6 pi over 2, 9 pi over 2. Every space is 3 pi over 2. So 3 pi over 2, 6 pi over 2, which reduces to 3 pi. 9 pi over 2. What will come after 9 pi over 2? 12 pi over 2. And 12 pi over 2 is the same as, do you see that? Each space is, so we're reducing fractions as we go. All right, this is cosine. Does cosine start at the middle or does it start at the max or min? It starts at the max or min. Will this cosine start at the maximum or will it start at the minimum? Why will it start at the minimum? Because of the negative. It wants to start up here at +2, but it has a negative, and that reflects it over the x-axis to be right here. Where do I go from there? Up and up. Then across the middle, back down. And if we back up, we have the same thing going on. We have a nice looking graph. Okay, perfect timing. We have 2 minutes to get your book assignment. I'll get that. It's important you work on this tonight. What is one of the key parts of the word homework? Home, home, home. Yep. Did you know that studies show that the more homework that you practice at home, the better you do in your classes? $1.5. Shout out to Maddie Jacobson. 176. Numbers 1 through 12. Now remember, this is because I didn't give you assignment on Friday. There you just identify the amplitude and the period. That's all you do for those. Amplitude and period. Okay? Then 35 through 40 you need to graph. Make sure your graphs are neat and orderly. Do not make a graph like that. Okay? That doesn't cut it, folks. That's not an acceptable graph. Okay? We're seniors, juniors, looking towards college. We want to make nice graphs so that your teacher can read your work. We will do a checkpoint at the beginning of class tomorrow and try a couple of these problems to make sure that we know what we're doing.